Deborah, would you please share your screen with the first slide from our deck? Great, and please go ahead and admit all the folks in the lobby.
Okie doke.
Thank you.
There you go.
Great. There is Chelsea. Great, good morning, everyone. I think we've got all who are in the lobby admitted now. Let's see, we've got one more. Good morning, this is Margie Tatro with GridWorks, joined by my colleagues Deborah Shields and Kathy Boyce, and with our PNM partners in the IRP conversation. And we are having this office hour session to give stakeholders an update on some requested modeling runs that have been conducted. Sorry, I'm going to go ahead and mute the conference room for a moment. Great. Again, thank you for being here. We're talking about modeling run requests that were completed since the prior workshop and to answer questions that stakeholders might have about those specific stakeholder requested modeling runs. As usual, we are recording this session, so you'll be able to get the link on the GridWorks website under this office hour of June 10th, should you wish to listen to the information again in the future. So you see our objective today is really to discuss those modeling runs that were both defined and completed since the prior workshop. Thank you to stakeholders who worked together to define the parameters for those runs. We are not planning to repeat the results of the runs that were already presented in the prior workshop. This is more to fill in those modeling runs that came in a bit later with the definition of those parameters. So we will turn the podium over to PNM to present their material, and after they have completed their presentation, we will open up the conversation to questions and discussion specifically on those modeling results that are being shared today. We'll adjourn by 11 and remind everyone that our next workshop is on June 17th. We hope you're there in person if you can. That will be held at the CNM Montoya campus in Albuquerque, and we'll give more information about that at the end of this office hour. So with that, Tom, let us turn over the presentation to your team. Tom Duane at the PNM IRP team.
All right, that sounds good. And are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, welcome to this office hour. Hard to believe we've already made it to June and into summer break for school and other things, and people taking vacation. But anyway, welcome here. The material today is fairly limited. We really had just a couple of scenarios we were going to complete and go over. So we'll probably go through that fairly quickly here and then open things up for questions. And on this, this slide here isn't in the material that was posted, but this is out of the May presentation where we just summarized the number of stakeholder requests we had received. We had basically 14 of them. We reviewed 10 of those in the last meeting. And so this one is just to finish off the few we didn't get to because of the timing of the request at that point. And so we did 10 requests last time around and had essentially 4 pending, one of which we aren't really doing a scenario on. That request was looking at some SERV-M around gas resiliency. And we are offering a gas resiliency study that we will be posting probably in about a week. But PNM is waiting to get a couple of edits made too, and it should be ready. Or gas volatility study rather is the one that will be ready in about a week. And then there's also a resiliency study underway that will be later on in the process. So anyway, getting to the scenarios today, one of the requests we received was one that was really a SERV-M request trying to look at interconnection reliability and trying to understand somewhat more what does increased interconnection mean in terms of reliability. The request was pretty complicated. It kind of tried to look at increasing transfer capability between SPP and PNM's area and the CalISO and PNM's area, and the modeling there was pretty complex. So we felt we really couldn't do that in the IRP timeframe. What we did agree to do on this one, however, was to just look at a SERV-M run, looking at our base case, CTP, and if we were to increase the interconnection capability primarily that we model going into Arizona, which is the main tie we have in that model, what would that do in terms of interconnection capability? What would that do really to potentially change PNM's reserve margin requirement to meet a 0.1 LOLE? So anyway, we had PowerGen go ahead and run that for us. We looked at increasing the high capacity, which is most restricted during the LOLE hours. In the summer, that gets down as low as 50 megawatts. So we looked at what would happen if we increase that to 100 megawatts. Getting a delay on slides moving. There we go. All right. So the effect of that, basically the 50 megawatt increase provided approximately a 40 megawatt benefit to reserve margin, which taking us from about a 14.5 that's been modeled in this, that would reduce you down to about a 13 reserve margin with that additional interconnection capacity. It's less than a one-to-one benefit, which does indicate that the resource adequacy of the surrounding areas also plays a role in there. Additional capacity isn't always deliverable. And that was pretty much the conclusions of that scenario. There wasn't a lot to it. But it does show that the increase in interconnection capacity does translate to a reserve margin reduction potentially. So the next couple of scenarios that we cover were provided largely by Anna Summers, CCAE, on behalf of CCAE, and we are looking at incorporating some of the requests from the geothermal work group in here, as well as some of the distributed energy resource subgroup as well. But the scenario kind of looks at understanding the impact of geothermal at the requested cost that was provided by the geothermal work group, of particularly on the enhanced geothermal, $6,100 per kW installed cost. And then we also go and look at a higher solar penetration, higher behind the meter solar penetration, and we add in here another one from the DER work group that includes looking at a high battery direct load control program. We added in there. One big difference that we have here from when we did this in May is that we have added an ITC to the geothermal cost, and that result will be shown here. And then we do one other run that's the same scenario, except we removed the gas generation in that was being put in 2029. So this graph here is basically just showing what the difference was. The blue line there shows us what we were modeling in our CTP case for behind the meter solar. And then the orange line is the amount of behind the meter solar being assumed in this scenario. And then likewise, the behind the meter battery on DLC control is shown there with the green line. That was not. We did have some of that available in our DR programs, but it was pretty small. This is a significantly greater amount being assumed in this particular scenario here. So when we go and put that in and compare it back to our CTP case, well, I compare it back to the geothermal case run on the CTP. Basically, these results show us what changed. And you'll see there that because of the geothermal ITC, probably the biggest thing that stands out is a significant amount of geothermal gets selected when you assume that ITC is available. The amounts of the ITC are 30% in 2033, and they diminish in the next 2 years, and they're at zero by the time you get to 2036. So the timing of that ITC actually plays a very important role in here. The fact that it's diminishing, it tends to want to overbuild that geothermal in 2033 to get the best economics. If you look at the demand response column, the numbers you see there are the value of the behind the meter solar, and that climbs to over 300 megawatts on that DLC program by 2045. But the column there sort of showing you how much is added in each year. And then the impact on other things with the behind the meter solar, the behind the meter battery, and the other thing assumed in here was the TOU sensitivity, so it's shifting the timing of the peak. Basically, we see a significant decrease in the amount of solar being added, and along with that, you'll tend to see a decrease in the amount of short duration storage that will go in. We did see the long duration storage was postponed out of this focus window of 2033 to 2036. And then longer term effects on that, because you're getting so much more on the demand side, nuclear ends up being deferred. The gas generation, the linear generation that we were seeing going in is no longer selected. And then there was somewhat of a trade-off between wind and solar, but overall the renewable generation from those two resources goes down and is replaced largely by the geothermal. And then when we look at what this scenario here, where we have also removed the gas generation, the results are almost identical. Scenario 11 and scenario 12 are pretty much identical, other than the gas CT generally is not getting replaced because of the reduced supply side need with the behind the meter programs. So we're basically just seeing that there isn't a need for as much generation capacity. Otherwise, the results were largely a wash, and we end up with almost identical supply and demand side options being added over the 20-year period. And this slide here also helps to emphasize that. You'll see that in the early years, 29 and the 32, there really isn't much being added to replace that CT. Has no effect on the focus window period of 2033 to 36. And the end result is really just the capacity of that CT is not added even out to 2045. And looking at the impact on the NPV, our CTP case is shown there, and then the scenario 11 case shows there's a reduction, which would be expected with the higher load side resources. The behind the meter solar is no longer is offsetting supply side resources. We don't have those costs because they would be customer owned facilities, the higher TOU rate and the higher battery DLC. And then you've got the lower cost also playing into that by adding the ITC in there. The scenario, they also requested that we do not do hydrogen conversions. So those have been dropped, and there is no gas generation running after 2044. And then deferred, we saw the deferred additions of the nuclear and the long duration storage. And when you take out the gas unit, you get another reduction because you're not paying for that particular facility any longer. When we look at the mix of resources that we see and categorized by the energy, carbon-free energy resources, dynamic balancing resources, and the firm dispatchable, this particular plot is comparing those back to what we had in the CTP. You'll see that wind and solar are largely replaced. A significant amount of that is replaced by the geothermal. The geothermal is both is basically going to be categorized as a firm dispatchable resource, but it also is a carbon-free resource. So the total makeup of carbon-free resources didn't really change between those. You also see that when the, again, scenario 12 there, that the carbon-free resource mix really doesn't change much. And you do see then an increase in dynamic balancing resources, which is the category for the DR. So that one's going up. One thing to keep in mind with these scenarios is that the capital costs are well below what we were assuming is the base from our IRP input. The 6100 kW becomes pretty attractive with an ITC in the post-2030 timeframe, but whether that's a realistic number is not something PNM is really on board with at this point. And the ITC is kind of interesting in that it's phased out right now by 2035. And without that ITC, the geothermal was kind of on the edge of being selected. The high behind the meter solar is, again, the amount of being modeled in here that is more than we are forecasting at this point. So that helps to drive down the supply side need by modeling a higher amount there. And then the capital cost is, of course, shifted to the customer from being a PNM resource cost. And then the high battery DLC potential is well above anything we were modeling as well. And not clear that that level is achievable or what would even drive it. But anyway, it plays a big role in reducing the amount of capacity needed on the system. The again, the capital cost of that is borne by the customer, so you see an offset on the NPV values that PNM shows. And that's pretty much what we have today. So if there's any questions on this, we'll open it up.
Great, thank you, Tom. It looks like Orland has a question. I'd like to come off mute and state your question, please.
Yeah. So I just put. Oops, sorry. Let me end one. Here in the same meeting as Ben here. Have you performed any sensitivity? If we could go back to slide 11.
Yeah, let me.
And I put my question in chat so you can read it, but you know, have you performed any sensitivity analysis around that customer participation? You know, for battery direct load or time of use programs. So the reason I ask is, you know, I'm just kind of pulling on the thread of it. You know, I'm curious on the robustness of that decision to avoid 172 megawatt combustion turbine systems.
We're not seeing that, Tom, just so you know.
Hold on, let me see.
Slide. Yeah.
We're trying to share.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. And thank you for your presentation. I don't want to jump the gun here, but I think it was slide 11. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that 172 megawatt combustion turbine. I'm just, yeah. So have you guys done any sensitivity analysis around, you know, customer rates for the battery direct load control and time of use programs?
The IRP did include a DR program that had some assumption in there going out to 2045. The potential of the program was not real high, but that was used as an option in the in pretty much all of the runs we did for the IRP. And I believe that one was selected, was it not? Yeah, so the DLC program that we got from ICF through the potential study was generally did look like it was favorable, but the potential of the program was fairly low, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, thanks.
Other than that, we haven't really done any sensitivities in the IRP. PNM has a pilot project in place right now on time of day rate. And that's being used to collect a fair amount of information to try to figure out the best way to design time of day programs.
Yeah,
But
trying to see this little screen here. So yeah, thanks. I think you know, a follow-up question, I guess, is, you know, which assumption showed the greatest effect on resource portfolio? You know, geothermal costs, behind the meter adoption, or demand response participation?
I would say for these two scenarios, the geothermal costs probably had the biggest impact, just because of the amount that was selected. We did look
Okay.
at that. The 350 megawatts being selected in 2033 in these runs is actually, if you assume that that ITC was continued throughout the 20-year time frame, it actually spreads that addition out quite a bit more in the first
Okay, thank
few
you.
years.
Great, thank you, Orland and Tom. I see we've got hands up from Anna Summer, Glenn, then Ryan, then Barbara. So let's start with you, Anna. Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing these results, Tom. I had a few follow-up questions, and I guess also some clarifications too about the intent of these scenarios. So maybe I'll start there. One of the reasons that we asked for a lowered geothermal cost as well as the application of the ITC is because there is no ITC modeled for geothermal resources in PNM's model right now, even though the ITC exists. And the other is that there seems to be the sort of preference for nuclear in order to meet the various carbon-related requirements in the model, you know, toward the end of the planning period. But the nuclear cost, in our view, is very low, and the geothermal cost also seem to be high. So I think there are some, you know, to your point, Orlando, about sensitivities that explore trade-offs. I think there are some potential considerations there around whether that nuclear cost is also achievable, even if there weren't an ITC that, you know, could be applied to the geothermal cost. And then the clarification questions I had for you, Tom, were you mentioned that the model seemed to have a preference for building geothermal as it reaches that sunset date for the ITC. Can you remind me what your annual and cumulative limits were on geothermal? Do you recall what those are?
They're unlimited.
They're unlimited.
Yeah, the amount of geothermal is unlimited in the run.
Okay.
We allowed it to select geothermal in 50 megawatt blocks, but it could put in as many of those as it thought was economical.
Okay. And then you had a column in your slides where you were showing, you're comparing and contrasting the amount of different resources that were added in our scenarios versus your CTP scenario. Is that rightmost column, that's just the difference in any given year, right? That doesn't indicate whether you have a capacity surplus or deficit on your system. Is that right?
Yeah, that's just the difference.
Okay. And do you, I'm assuming that you enforce the same reserve margin requirement in these scenarios. So even in the scenario where the 172 megawatts of new CT capacity isn't added, you're still meeting your reserve margin requirement in 2029. Is that safe to assume?
Yes, the reserve margin is being met, should be met throughout, or that then tends to drive capacity additions.
Okay, great. I think that's it. Oh, actually, sorry, one other question. Will you be able to post these inputs and outputs on the share file site so that we can look at them in more detail?
Yes, we can put those out there.
We will do that, Anna.
Okay.
Thank you for the reminder.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Anna. So it sounds like these results, which are hot off the computer will be loaded into the venue site for those who have access, have requested access. If you're a stakeholder that has not yet requested access, you can go to the GridWorks website and see the instructions and form to request that. So thanks, Anna, for that reminder. Let's go to Glenn, then Ryan, and then Barbara. Glenn, please go ahead.
Sure, yeah. Originally I was going to ask about flexibility, but as I stare at, bring up slide 7 again, and on slide 7, if you just kind of look at the total megawatt column all the way on the right, I think it summarizes pretty much what's happening year to year. So, oop, you went past it. Yeah, yeah, there you go. Okay. So, it's my understanding that basically you just removed the constraint, the hard-coded restraint that put in the 172 megawatts of gas, and let the model choose the optimal result. And so now we're looking at the optimal result, which pulls out gas and replaces it with a lot less resources, at least in the short term, up to 2032. If I add that up, that's about 40 megawatts. So it pulls out 189 megawatts in 2029, and then just puts like back a fraction of that through 2032. So it kind of looks to me like the hard-coded 172 of gas was an overbuild. It wasn't optimal. Isn't that what this is telling us?
I don't think so. We didn't really try to look at that by itself. We attribute that to the capacity amount needed in a time frame is reduced because of these other demand side assumption changes that were put in there have reduced the need. And then you've
Okay, I
also
guess
got,
maybe what we're not seeing here, the behind the meter stuff is not on this chart. Is that where I'm getting lost?
yeah, particularly TOU doesn't show up and what effect that has on the peak demand. The battery DLC does show up in that demand response column. It's kind of treated as a demand response program. But then the behind the meter solar is just built into the load. It's a load
Yeah,
modifier.
okay, that's your net load. Okay. Um, yeah, so I guess one might add the column of how much solar behind the meter is part of this to better understand it, but it still sort of hints at the 172 of gas in 29 being too early and not being needed. So, but then my original question had to do with flexibility, because the other thing we're seeing here is replacing kind of the gold standard of flexibility, the gas combustion turbine, with geothermal, which while you have it in the dispatchable column is minimally dispatchable. It's kind of like a coal plant, I think. And so I have to ask, and the behind the meter stuff is largely not controllable. So does this ensure that you're meeting your LOLE and your expected unserved energy constraints? Are these these really workable portfolios, or would they have to go through a second round of checking with ServM or something?
We would probably run these through a second round with ServM and see what they come out like. We haven't teed that up to PowerGem yet, but that was really kind of the plan, is to take a look at that and see how close they are to the 0.1 LOLE.
So you do intend to do that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. Ryan, would you please go ahead and ask your next question? And Ryan, do you please remind us of your organization?
Happy to. Thank you. My name is Ryan McGraw. I'm with Zanskar Geothermal, so I'm interested in the geothermal side here. Zanskar, for those who aren't aware, we're the only geothermal operator in New Mexico right now with the Lightning Dock facility. My question is with respect to the definition of enhanced geothermal systems, and wondering if you can describe a little bit about what that means to you and how that might differentiate from other forms of geothermal like conventional or advanced geothermal systems.
So I'm not sure I'm the best at describing that, but the enhanced is really using more the technologies associated with some of the gas and oil drilling, finding hot rock and extracting the heat from it, basically, versus the conventional being located where you've got a geothermal source already. So we did model those two differences. We have both conventional and enhanced modeled in our run pretty much throughout this IRP.
Okay, and so would the model runs right now indicate that conventional geothermal does not make sense, even if it were to actually come in at a much lower CapEx cost?
I think that we basically modeled an extension of Lightning Dock, which I know you provided a comment on earlier. The only reason it's not being selected is simply because the enhanced technology had a better capacity factor with it. It also has the enhanced technology, we also assume has a development cost curve, so it's potentially declining over time, whereas conventional, we were not assuming that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, not a conversation for today, but I'd actually love to chat with you guys a bit about that and maybe, provide some insights if it's useful to you.
All right.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate that. I think Barbara, you're up. Barbara Chatterjee, next for the question. Please go ahead with your question. Barbara, are you able to hear me? Let me see if I can unmute you. Barbara Chatterjee, would you like to pose your question? Maybe she stepped away. All right, we'll come back to you, Barbara. And there's a button at the bottom of your WebEx screen that says raise hand, a little smiley face next to it. That's if anybody's having trouble finding the raise hand. So Darren, please go ahead with your question and then we'll come back to Barbara.
All right, thanks. Tom, this is Darren Zigich at the PRC. The 172 on the gas is throwing me off a little bit, especially after looking at your current filing, resource filing. And I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as what we're using for the load, the expected load right now. Because I mean, the gas capacity in your resource filing is double that number. But you're adding a lot of, you're adding some fat to the numbers. You got the 36B expansion, you have the 350 of economic development, and then you have the 200 megawatt cushion for the Senate Bill 170. And I just wanted to make sure that, are we using the same expected load for 2029 and 30 and further on as we are in the resource filing in this case?
Essentially, the load is pretty much the same. The resource filing was based on a little bit higher load forecast, but it did include the other loads you mentioned in there. So there's a bit of a difference there. There was a change in going into the IRP. We updated some assumptions, and PNM's overall existing portfolio ended up showing a little bit better capacity, which is why the IRP started out at less than the original resource filing. I think we addressed that in the resource filing testimony. Some of the expectations that will come out, and the resource filing isn't proposing gas at this point. It's proposing doing a supplemental RFP to potentially fill that gap and define it. And that RFP has been issued. We don't have bids in yet to really do further evaluation on what else might be needed to fill that gap at this point.
Okay, but I mean, are we gonna, at the end of the day, is the IRP load number is going to match what you're using in, you know, with this extra load, you know, including the Senate Bill 170 additional load and all that.
Yes, we would, at this point, I would expect that would all still be there.
Oh, okay. So they'll sync up then. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you, Darren. Let me try Barbara again to see if you were able to unmute your microphone. All right, I've encouraged Barbara to put her question into the chat if her microphone seems to not be working.
Margie, she has.
Excellent. Let's go ahead. Go ahead.
Why don't I read it for you, Barbara, and please chime in if you're able to get on. She's asking, can PNM share the actual TOU pilot reports so that we can better understand their findings in the initial effort of installing the smart meters?
Yeah, we provided the docket number, but we'll upload the report to Venue today.
Okay, thank you.
And Monique, that link was provided in the workshop summary from the last workshop. So Barbara, if you have we had a workshop summary and then a corrected version of that summary, and it has a link to that report as well. So if we have something direct, great, Monique, but also Barbara, you can find that information with the reference to that material from the summary from our prior workshop. Great, thank you for the question. I see that, Kathy, did that answer Barbara's question? Okay,
it looks
great,
like,
thanks,
yep.
Barbara. Back to you, Glenn. I think you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up. Tom, I thought I heard you say there's no gas proposed in the resource filing, but the way I'm reading it, there's a 40 megawatt La Luz 2 project that's part of that. Curiously, to be built by somebody named Gridworks.
Yeah, you're right, Glenn. That was an oversight on my part. That
Okay.
40 megawatt project was part of the original RFP proposal submitted, and it's been selected in the preferred portfolio.
And I'll just address the name clarification. That is not us. We are Gridworks Inc. There's I'm sorry, we're Gridworks Org, and there's a Gridworks Inc. that is active in New Mexico. So two separate organizations. We're the nonprofit. They are a for-profit developer. And no connection.
Yeah, that's created a bit of confusion, but
Yes, apologize for that. Glenn, does that answer your question?
Absolutely. I just want to make sure that everyone understood there is some gas coming in the application. Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? Let me ask if there's anyone on from Interwest, in case there are any questions about the approach and the analysis on the transmission modeling piece. Anyone there who had an interest in transmission, had any questions about that first segment that Tom described? Okay, not seeing any there. Please, back to anyone else who has questions on any of these runs.
Hey, Margie, this is Ben from E3.
Yes, go ahead, Ben.
Maybe just a quick comment to a question that Ryan asked earlier regarding the geothermal that was getting selected. Just kind of as a broader reminder to the entire group, all of the modeling that's been done to date is just using generically priced resources. And I would maybe urge stakeholders to refrain from drawing those like really distinct conclusions, like is my resource getting selected, is it not? Those really resource specific decisions will come from future RFPs when real prices are known, real projects are known. So again, just urging a little bit of caution not to read too much into the tea leaves at this stage.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yes, Julia, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Julia from Linear Energy. I'm just trying to understand the impacts of the no hydrogen conversion because it seems like that's just sort of treated as a reduction in cost, but does that essentially mean that all gas is phased out by 2045?
Yeah, it essentially means that all gas is phased out by 2045, and it would have been replaced by other technologies.
Okay, so I guess when looking at sort of the present value of the gas that might be added, is that just looking at it with the lifespan ending in 2045, whereas previously it might have been its 30-year life?
The gas was usually, if it was added in the IRP window, I think we were using more than a 20-year life on it, and it would have assumed a hydrogen conversion. So if we don't have that, then basically we ran this with no new gas being added in there. So there really isn't any units that aren't depreciated by 2045 that we would have.
Okay, thanks, that's helpful.
Great, thanks, Julia. Tom Conroy, I think you have your hand up next. Please go ahead. Tom Conroy, can you hear me and come off mute?
Yes, it helps if I'm off mute. Yes.
There you go. Please go ahead.
I finished my question. No, Ben from E3 he actually made an interesting point that raises two questions for me. One is, he said, for these assets that generic costs are being used, which are for some proposed assets are, you might as well use a dartboard. It really doesn't matter because some assets are quite site specific in their cost structures. And then the second thing he said is that the RFPs in the future will go and identify the specific costs. So that actually raises the second question I have, which is the current, request of that Jagger system that PNM has out there that is called an RFP, but as I read it, it's not at all an RFP, it's an RFQ, in fact. And is there any plan to actually do RFPs and do any runs with supplier estimated costs?
So Tom Conroy, let me jump in. The current solicitation that's out now is not a subject of our conversation here today. It's a separate process from the IRP. So just want to put that in as a note, but I'll let PNM respond as they wish. I wanted to make sure that folks knew that we're not talking about that particular solicitation that's out at this point. But Tom, would you or Tom, others from PNM like to add something to respond to Mr. Conroy?
I don't know that I have too much to add. I really don't know that I understand the question. The Jagger system is used for communication with bidders. It's used as a tool, so I really don't know what's he's seeing that makes him feel that we aren't using that for requests for proposals from the suppliers themselves.
Excuse me, I have a question. So, what is the
So hold on, Ben, can I ask you to hold for a moment till we close out this other topic? So Tom Conroy, we direct your questions regarding that existing solicitation to the system that's been set up for that. I can say that I know that the utility also does analysis when they receive bids from those types of solicitations. And that's what Ben Elsey was referring to, that the IRP model uses generic costing, and then when a solicitation occurs and bids come in, then the utility does another analysis. So that, hopefully that answers your question. Great. Okay. And before we, I think we have a question. Let's before we go to you, Benham, let's go back to Barbara. She's had her hand up. Barbara, are you now able to come off mute?
Yeah, I finally figured it out. I'm just kind of tech negative here. What I wanted to ask, I will read through the report on the time of use, and I might have more questions when we meet next week. But I have a question about how much installing all those AMI meters is costing, and how that impacts what PNM is hoping to gain from the installation of the AMI meters. And that might not be something to answer today, but I'd like to see it in future discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think that information is available, including in our GridMod filing, but I don't have that available to your address today. But we'll look into it.
Great.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Barbara, after you've taken a look at that report, why don't you come back to us to see if there's further conversation? That would be great.
Will do. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Okay, Ben, I'm back to you. Would you please introduce yourself?
Hello. Sorry, I didn't notice you're in the middle of conversation. I didn't want to be mean. So I'm a grid tech specialist at PRC, New Mexico Public Regulation Commission. I have a question. What kind of process PNM uses to ensure that a new or novel technology is reliable for like interconnect or like including the RFPs? What kind of process do you guys use to ensure that a novel technology, it's a broad concept. It can include like geothermal, novel gas turbines, and like and different energy storage scenarios. What kind of process do you use to ensure that that's reliable for RFPs, to include in the RFPs?
So, Benham, I have to again tell you that the RFP is not a conversation for, we're in the IRP stakeholder process. So I'm not sure, Tom or Monique, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that, I mean, certainly you could talk about how you consider reliability of technologies in your planning, but that's not specifically going to be addressed today with respect to RFP analysis. Okay, Benham, is that all right? That's because that's a separate proceeding.
What about in IRP scenarios? How do you ensure the reliabilities of the different technologies in IRPs?
Perfect. Great restating the question. Thank you.
So all of the technologies have assumptions that go along with them, and in those assumptions, you're factoring in the overall reliability of the resource, maybe through forced outage rates, through load shapes or other things, or resource shapes. But you have, with every resource, an availability factor that is considered in the analysis. And the studies also, we do reliability runs on the IRP cases to specifically look at whether we're meeting our reliability criteria in terms of loss of load event. So that is actually part of the IRP analysis, and those characteristics of the resources all play into that.
Yeah, I would also add that in terms of technology viability, we rely on our consultants, which in this case, we relied on EPRI to tell us whether technologies were viable and feasible for this industry, for our service territory, and whether there was enough information out there that we could consider it a feasible technology.
Great. Thank you for the question, and thanks, Tom and Monique, for the response. Before we go to two other people with their hands up, I think Glenn and Julia, let me go to Joe on chat, who's having trouble with the microphone. Joe is Joe Marshall from the Navajo Transitional Energy Company. Kathy, would you like to go ahead and read Joe's question?
Sure. Yep, he's asking, given the 2045 carbon-free requirement under the Energy Transition Act, is PNM open to PPA structures, so purchase power agreements, that include a hydrogen conversion option as an alternative to early termination for gas resources? And Joe, I'm going to kind of put some guardrails here. That feels like a very specific bid composition. So I think that question is really more appropriate for an RFP and a bidders conference than it is in this resource planning. And PNM, if you disagree, I'll invite you to step in, but I think we need to make sure we have some guardrails here on what is solicitation bidders questions.
I would agree with you, Kathy, and I think you can pose that question on the Jagger platform and then they can respond to it there.
Thank you.
Yeah,
but I think there's also guidance in the RFP itself to read the document.
Thank you. That's Lori Williams, PNM, suggesting that that resource not only may be addressed through the information in the RFP. Thanks, Lori. Okay, I see Glenn and then Julia with your hands up. Please go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, I was looking for clarification from Ben's statement about generic resources. So I think Ryan was trying to figure out if the conventional geothermal could be construed. Could you learn something about conventional geothermal from the results we just saw that used the advanced geothermal? And then Ryan said, well, these are just generic resources. And my thought is that, well, are there two different prices applied to the generic resource such that the generic resource for conventional geothermal would be priced differently in the model than the advanced EGS geothermal would be placed? So just to help Ryan try to get some information out of the results. Thanks.
Yeah, and the pricing is going to be different between the technology, but that's all information that we provided in the past in presentations, and all data is available and posted on Venue for stakeholders to get to the information.
So then it's fair to say that if you reduce the generic conventional geothermal resource in this last scenario, then the results could have been a little different.
Potentially, yes, we did look at that, though. If you go back to the previous workshop, the costs assumed for the stakeholder scenarios on the geothermal are provided in that presentation. And then the cost PNM used for the IRP are all out there on Venue.
Okay, cool.
Great.
And then Margie, sorry,
Yes,
this is Ben from E3. Just to add to that, Glenn, I'm just going to be like really clear here. The price of geothermal is just one variable in a very complex model, right? The selection of geothermal is dependent upon the cost of wind, of solar, of lithium-ion storage. It's dependent upon the cost of all of the technologies, right? So I don't think you should go away and say, hey, if geothermal was $5,000 a kW, then it would get selected. If it was $6,000 a kW, it wouldn't. It would be very much dependent on the cost of all of the other technologies available. And that's why it's critical for utilities like PNM to do these wide casting nets with an RFP, see what all of the market data actually is, rerun the model, and then pick the truly lowest cost, most reliable portfolio. So again, just urging not to just look at these decisions in isolation.
Great, Ben, thank you for that reminder. Julia, please go ahead with your question.
Thanks. Yeah, apologies if this might have been addressed in an earlier session, but just looking at the modeling outputs that you've posted so far, I've been trying to understand as gas winds down in the kind of last few years of the model, why there's these massive capacity values showing up, if that's a sort of penalty for capacity shortfall or something like that. So it'd be great if you could help me understand what that represents, and then if you're kind of seeing similar results with these new sensitivities without the gas plant added.
The IRP runs throughout have shown significant additions towards the end of the 20-year period. You're going to see bigger builds if you don't assume the gas can continue operating. It's going to have to replace even more capacity in that case. So I think that's probably some of what you're seeing in there. The gas capacity is being replaced with other resources.
And just as a reminder, the one of the modeling assumptions is that we're winding down the firm capacity for our existing fleet. A lot of that's the firm generating resources on our system. And that is just to show that we're not going to be able to build, thousands of megawatt of new generation just in 1 year. And so we've kind of showed this winding down of firm generation so that we could actually build into getting to 2045, where we're going to be carbon free.
Yeah, that makes sense. I understand that. I'm wondering specifically about the output on capacity value, especially since there's no capacity value in reality. In those final years, I'm starting to see like resources assigned, billions of dollars in capacity value, and trying to understand if that's indicative of the model trying to solve when there's kind of a lack of sufficient supply.
The capacity value that adds in there will be largely built around trying to make sure it maintains the minimum reserve margin criteria. So if it's showing capacity going in, that's one of the reasons it would be there. The other would be because energy was just plain needed from a resource there. The capacity values are another thing. The resources have different capacity values that go into the firm capacity amounts, and that information, we tend to call those ELCCs, but that information is also available on Venue, how the capacity is defined for each of the resource types.
And I think another thing you got to remember too, which is not really evident in any of the charts, but it's happening throughout the model, is a lot of the purchase power agreements we have for renewables are 20-year contracts. And so resources that have been put in the last 5 years will start to retire toward the last 5 years of the planning horizon that we're in now. And so that's another phenomenon where you're losing capacity on the back end of the model. You got a triple whammy. We're phasing out gas. We're reducing the firm capacity on gas because we're trying to build in renewable into the latter part of the plan. And you've got 20-year PPAs that are starting to retire in the back end of that plan that are going to add more capacity to replace that. So you got some double whammies there that you just got to keep in mind on.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I see we are coming to the close of our hour. I see a comment by Anna in the chat that is more a commentary on advocating using updating pricing as possible, not directly related to these scenarios that were just run. I mean, it is important to the whole process. So thank you, Anna, for your comment. I think we won't open that up for discussion at this point. And at this point, Glenn, I see you have a question. But let's go ahead and let people know what's happening next. And Kathy, anything that you see that we need to address? Let's talk about what's happening next. Glenn, we may defer your question to the next workshop when we analyze and discuss a recap of all these results. So just to summarize and to respect people's time this morning, the recording will be posted on our GridWorks website. There are a few actions that have come up out of this session, including posting these results on Venue, which I'm sure the PNM team will complete shortly. Also, Tom mentioned the studies, the gas resilience and volatility study updates, that those are still in process. So you will get results. We will post those when available, and they may probably highlight those at our next workshop. The next workshop is the 17th of June from 9 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon at the CNM Montoya campus. There will be a WebEx link available, though we are strongly and highly encouraging in-person attendance because the conversation will be rich, deep, and collaborative, and it's easier to do that when you're in person. So at that workshop, our focus will be on a recap of all modeling activities and our first discussion about the statement of need and action plan. As many of you know, we've been digging deep into modeling the past 3 months, and now we are returning to a big picture on what do these results mean in terms of informing the statement of need and action plan. So with that, Kathy, let me ask you or Deb, is there anything we need to do administratively with this group?
None from my end. Thank you.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Thank you. And last word comes from Tom. Tom and the team, is there anything you wanted to mention before we close?
No, just appreciate the participation and thank people for being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you then on the 17th.
Great. Thank you so much. Again, thanks for being here. Thanks to the PNM for scheduling these intermediate sessions between workshops to share information with the stakeholders. And we will see you all in Albuquerque on the 17th. Bye-bye.